Welcome to Sew Very Easy. My name is Laura, and when you find a fabric that looks like someone has been knitting or crocheting, we need to, of course, make a bag to keep our knitting or crocheting in it. So the bag is going to have a round shape, a hard bottom, and the sides are going to be able to come down so we can use it as a bowl and store it as we go. This fabric is from Camelot, and it does look like someone has been crocheting some granny squares and that mile-a-minute pattern. So I'm going to use this fabric to make a knitting bag. And I want a nice big knitting bag. And so for a pattern, I'm going to use a 12-inch pizza pan. What we're looking for is something that's considered 12 inches. When we're done the bag, this is going to fit right in the bottom of the bag, so it's going to be a nice, firm bottom. And to make the sides stand upright, we are going to use this sewable foam. Now this is considered a 12-inch, but it's 12-inch from the inside to the inside. But you can use any circle and adjust the size accordingly. The easiest thing to do is put your container upside down, and then we're going to measure all the way around. My measurement comes to 40 inches, so yours might be a little different. So whatever that measurement is, we just need to add a seam allowance. So I'm going to do 40.5 inches, and yours might vary. So I'm going to keep that measurement in mind, and the first thing I'm going to do is make my bag bottom. So I'm going to use this as a guide and cut out 2 circles. I'm going to use that sewable foam for the bottom, so I need to have that foam a 1/4 inch smaller. That's going to give me a 1/4 inch seam allowance all the way around. Now I happen to have some leftover foam that I sewed together, but you can always do that in one piece. So I'm going to do a row of stitching about a 1/4 inch from that foam edge and do a stitch right through the center, so it's sort of like a pie shape. I just want to hold these pieces together. It's going to be easier to work with, and it's going to stay together if and ever I need to wash the bag. So I have that foam stitched on to the one side, and I have that second side. I can put that aside, and I'm going to work on the sides. So my measurement was 40 inches, so I'm going to make a piece of fabric 40.5 inches. And I'm going to get that from the width of the fabric, because most quilting fabric is about 45 inches. And then I'm going to use 1 yard of fabric, which is our 36 inches. And this size can vary. Along this 40-inch, I do want to put some more of this sewable foam. So it's going to go around the bag like this. So on one end, I'm going to sew that foam on. Leave a 1/4 inch from the bottom. Leave your seam allowances on each side and then stitch all the way around. So the bag is going to be a 10-inch high bag. But of course, if you want a higher bag, you can definitely do that. I'm going to sew this together in a really long tube. So I have those foam edges matching, and I want to sew up that one side. But I do want to leave an opening in the center. So take your fabric, fold it in half, and from that halfway mark, go 4 inches on each side. This little 8-inch mark is where the whole bag is going to be turned right side out. So we will need a larger spot to get this foam through. So sew along this edge and along that edge. So we're not sewing on the foam, we're going to go right on the edge of the foam. Once that seam is stitched, we're going to have this long tube. And I would recommend pressing that seam flat, which means this little area that has the hole has that seam pressed on both sides. This is going to be an easier way to finish it than having to match up the seams after. Now we're going to stitch on our 2 circles. The piece that has the foam on is going to get stitched along the bottom, and the one without is going to get stitched on the top. So we're going to match up those right seams and stitch 1/4 inch along the edge, which means we will not be catching that foam. And if you do catch it a little bit, that's fine too. The way I like to sew my bottoms on is I'm going to pin, and I'm going to put those pins from the outside, match up those seam allowance, and then I'm going to do a row of hand stitching just to baste and hold those together so I can take out those pins. And that way I know that it's going to match. So the foam circle is on the foam side, and the plain fabric one is on the plain side. And even with this side, I find pinning from the outside does make it easier to sew. We can now turn this right side out. So let's bring that whole bag right through that hole. To straighten this up, start with the foamy side inside. So this is the fabric bottom. Put in your pan along the bottom, and now I'm going to be able to just pull that top fabric until the bottom of the bag is going to match up. So you can already see how this is going to stand up in a nice position. And then we're going to be able to take this to the iron and iron this flat all the way. We're going to put a casing up in the top, so it's important that we match up this bottom before we go any further. Once that edge is matched up and pressed, we'll put a couple of pins to hold those edges together. Once we've pinned those edges, we could take that pizza pan out. We're going to do 2 rows of stitching along the top, but before that, be sure to check in and make sure everything is straight. Now I can take this to the sewing machine and do 2 rows of stitching. The first row of stitching, I'm going to do a 1/2 inch, and then I'm going to do another 1/2 inch. So what we're looking at is 3 openings. I'm going to want to leave this center one open. That's the one that a pull cord is going to go in. I'm going to top stitch and close off that seam. Stitch here, close off the seam, go up, close off, and here. So I'm only going to leave those 2 spots open, but I am going to close up that seam. Once that's closed off, we're going to be able to put some cording through this center one. So it's going to go all the way around and come out on the other side. You're going to need about 1.5 yards of this cording. To finish it off, I'm going to use these little things that you will find on the end of hoodies. Those little strings around the hoodie a lot of times are attached on these, and they keep the cord in place. So I'm going to squeeze that together and put the one side through, and then the next cord is going to go in the same direction through that second hole. Now tie those ends together. And if you want, before you tie that, you can always put on these decorative ends. They just cover the knots. Now these you can get at a sewing store or a craft and hobby store. And you'll get them where you buy your buttons. So that just goes in. I tie that knot, and that is going to cover the knot. Now this is a reversible bag, but I do like the foam part on the outside. So I'm going to turn all of that foam out. I'm going to put in my pizza pan to give that a nice strong bottom. And I now have a very large finished bag. So my knitting is going to be able to go inside. But when I'm working on anything, I'm going to be able to turn this to the outside, right along that foam side. So I now have this big bowl that I'm going to be able to work with. I can put my wool in the bottom. As I'm knitting, that wool is going to be able to come out. And as I'm working on it, I can get a really big, chunky sweater in this bowl. I can put my directions in and any extra notions that I'm needing in there. I can now tighten up that toggle by squeezing it. And I have a nice big storage bag. It has that nice hard bottom on it. So whenever I'm working on this, I've turned that bag into a big bowl. So this bowl sort of bag will hold a big chunky sweater, so we don't have to worry about where we're going to put things as we're working on them. It'll all fit right inside. That outside foam helps keep that bowl shape as we're working on it. I needed a half a yard of this outside fabric and 2 fat quarters for the bottom. Now I can take my knitting anywhere. Thank you for joining me today on Sew Very Easy. Feel free to subscribe. I'm on Facebook, Instagram. I have a newsletter. It's all free under Sew Very Easy. Thanks again for joining me. Bye for now.